So my first refutation is going to be about how the negative claims that mandatory voting may increase the number of informal votes, but that's not true. Citizens are not necessarily required to cast a ballot. Voters do not actually have to cast their vote, but can mark none of the above. So if a voter is uninformed on the topic, or doesn't choose to share the opinion, or doesn't even want to vote in general, they don't necessarily have to. By making voting mandatory, it's not saying that you have to submit your vote, it's saying that you have to go to the voting polls, register to vote, and get your and cast your ballot. You don't necessarily have to vote for any particular party, and it's not considered persuasion also. They say that the negative also argued that compulsory voting will not lower election campaign costs, but that's not true. It definitely will. Because mandatory voting means that no large campaign funds are needed to goad voters to the polls, the role of money in politics will decrease. Usually whenever campaigns are occurring, the more money that's poured in, the more people they attract, the more voters they can get, the more votes that are casted in their position. But now that everyone is required to vote, it's not necessarily a matter of, oh, how many people can we attract to our campaign stops or to our speeches. It's going to be more, how can I convince these people that my position is correct and that you should vote for me, rather than you should just vote in general. Campaigns will also have to persuade an entire nation rather than just a small select group of voters. William Galston said, campaigns can no longer prevail by simply mobilizing core supporters. Instead, they have to persuade voters to swing their way. Again, I say, you have to now persuade an entire nation of voters to see your viewpoint and to want to vote for you and to believe in you as a candidate, rather than just voting, just having the core small group percentage of voters vote for you that would have normally voted for you that are in your political party. Campaigns no longer now that campaigns will no longer have to persuade people to even come out and vote, they can focus on their opponents instead. Hayden Manning said, after all, mandatory voting makes it easier for politicians to focus on attacking opponents without being distracted on the task of encouraging sometimes disillusioned party bases to turn out. Now, instead of actually having to, again I say, bring voters into the polls, they can focus on why their opponents are different and strengthen their arguments and strengthen their positions even more. Focus all that energy and money that would have necessarily been spent on persuading people to actually perfect or somewhat substantialize their position or their laws that they want to pass. Another thing that I wanted to refute was how the negative stated that simply because it worked in Australia does not mean that it's going to work in the US. That's true. But at the same time, it shows an example that it actually can work with large groups of people in large countries, and the fact that it's been successful there means that there's a possibility of it being successful in America. And due to our low voting poll turnouts, I feel like anything would be better than not trying right now. Although they say that there would be a very minuscule amount of change within voting polls, when you think about it, if only 40 to 60% of people are voting, at least 60 to 40% of people can vote. That's a substantial amount of votes that can be included into our presidential elections, primary elections, or any other things that need to be passed. Also, they say the negative claim that we cannot compare the U.S. to the negative also said that we cannot compare the U.S. to Australia because they're different systems, but yet they compared other countries to us on how we on whether or not we would implement these laws. If we can't say that if we can't use the argument that Australia implemented these laws causing more people to come out and vote, then we also can't use the same argument saying that because other countries didn't enforce it, we won't either. We're different countries, again, similar to what they said. But by saying that, it contradicts the statement that we can't compare ourselves to other countries when in fact they just did themselves. Also, it's not going to be, okay, making voting mandatory does not make it an obligation. It keeps it as a right. Because no one is obligated to vote, again I say. People do not necessarily have to vote. You don't have to do that. There are many exemptions. In countries like Brazil, according to Simon Jackman, age exemptions are also common. Brazil makes voting optional for citizens between 16 and 18, citizens over the age of 70, and for illiterateness. So just because, if the US is going to take notes from other countries on their voting, we can also take that note from Brazil. We don't necessarily have to demand everyone to come to the voting polls, whether you're sick, dying, something else is happening to you. But with valid reason, you don't have to necessarily vote. No one is forcing you to, no one is forcing or trying to persuade your votes in any way necessarily. The United States just needs more of its citizens to participate in the democracy and participate in our government systems. Thank you.
I'm sorry, are we getting the right time signals over there? That's supposed to be a 4-minute rebuttal.
Wait, what?
Were you giving time signals during the last speech?
Yeah.
Did
How
you?
many minutes were left?
Right, and she's supposed to have 4 minutes
Oh, I started.
for the rebuttals, right? So, I just wanted you to know, the reason I put my hand up in the air is because that's when you were out of time. The
Oh,
other
good.
2.5 minutes that you went past that was all out of time.
Oh, I apologize.
Well, you know, like I said, it was a little confusion because you got the wrong signal. That's. I just wanted to explain. I was not saying right on. I believe you. You know, I'm just saying you're out of time. Knock it off. You know? Okay.
Sorry.